Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the virtual Princeton Public Library. My name is Nora, and I'm part of the program team, and we are thrilled to be offering you a virtual version of our local author days. We'll be featuring presenters here on Crowdcast, networking hours on Zoom, and a virtual author and publisher fair on our website. You can find information on all of these by clicking on the green button below the video. We hope you'll take some time, especially to visit our virtual author booths and perhaps find your next favorite read. Tonight's presentation is being recorded and will be available following the live presentation here on Crowdcast. Tonight, I'm so pleased to be joined, I apologize for that siren, so pleased to be joined by publishing specialist Jane Friedman for a presentation on today's key book publishing paths. Jane is a full-time freelancer and has 20 years of experience in the publishing industry. She's the author of The Business of Being a Writer and co-founder of The Hot Sheet, the essential publishing industry newsletter for authors, which was named the 2020 Media Outlet of the Year by Digital Book World. In this session, she'll help you understand the pros and cons of every major publishing path available, distinguish among the primary forms of book publishing today, and help you better understand what will best suit your next project. Jane will present for approximately half an hour or so and then open up to your questions, and we hope you'll take full advantage of this opportunity. You can use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen to submit your questions, and you can upvote any questions that you see from other people that you'd like to see answered. So I'm going to bring Jane up on screen now, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming her. Hello, Jane, welcome.
Hello, thank you, Nora. It's a pleasure to be here. So I do have quite a number of slides I'm going to go through for my presentation, so I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right. So I'm just going to get straight to it and describe how I think of the publishing industry today, which is falling into the paths of publishing fall into three areas very broadly. We have traditional publishing, which this is what I call the dream. So often when people think about writing and publishing a book, they're thinking of the big New York publisher, the Penguin Random House or the HarperCollins that's going to publish their book and rocket them onto the New York Times bestseller list. And everyone hopes they'll get a really big advance, in the 6 or 7 figures. And then when you earn out that advance, you start earning royalties and you retire rich. Or that's the dream. Happens for a select few. In a traditional publishing scenario, what's so great about this for authors is that the publisher is shouldering the financial risk. So you don't pay anything to get published. The publisher is investing in you as the author. And if the book happens to tank and the publisher loses money, you still get to keep your advance in most cases. The other great thing about traditional publishing, although some of this advantage is dwindling, is that you get this really wonderful presence in bookstores and retail outlets everywhere. So you get to see your print book on the shelves of your local bookstore or at a Barnes & Noble, maybe even Costco or Walmart. Or the boutique shop around the corner from you. So traditional publishers are really great at getting books in bricks and mortar retail outlets. But of course, as we all know, during the last year, that hasn't necessarily been a strength since we're all going online to buy books. And we'll talk more about that as we go, because that does affect your choices here and what sort of publishing path you might take. The next category is hybrid and assisted. So this is, I think, one of the more confusing options for people. It's also something that keeps changing over time, and it can be very difficult to define. For our purposes this evening, I consider hybrid or assisted methods to be scenarios where the author is paying to publish upfront. And while you may be signing something that looks like a royalty contract, you're going to get higher royalties than if you were in a traditional publishing agreement. There are even some agreements that pay you what we call 100% net, which is 100% of all the proceeds after the retail outlet takes their cut. So there are lots of different types of agreements here. But generally, you can expect higher royalties than you would get with a traditional house. The other thing that people really like about this arrangement, if you compare it to self-publishing, is that you get the feel of a traditional publishing experience. So you're taken care of. There's usually an editor and a designer and a marketer and a publicist involved. And we'll talk more specifically about what this can look like, the different varieties of these companies. But you're not out there all alone trying to market and promote your book. You do have the support of a company behind you. And then finally, there's what I call independent publishing or do-it-yourself self-publishing. When you hear the term indie author or indie authorship, that this is what I'm talking about, the people who are basically professional authors publishing on their own without the help of any kind of company or service aside from those that they're hiring directly. So it's the author is entrepreneur, and they might be hiring their own editors, designers, and publicists rather than doing the work themselves, but they're making those decisions on a case-by-case basis as part of their overall business. They're keeping 100% of their net sales after the retailer takes their cut, and they're typically using services like Amazon's Kindle Direct, Ingramspark, and other distributors. So it's key here to realize that the author here is acting as the publisher. They're essentially setting up a small press that publishes one author, which is themselves. When you're in a hybrid or assisted arrangement, most of those arrangements, you're still being published by some entity or third party, and their name may be on the book or their branding may be affiliated with the book in some way. So let's go back to the traditional publishing path and explore that more fully. You may already be very aware of the pros of traditional publishing, but for the most part, you can be assured that you're going to get a pretty high quality package. Like the publisher knows exactly how to put a cover on that, the right sort of title and subtitle, the right pricing and the right paper and all of the qualities that go into a book that will sell in a bookstore. They know how to do that. Doesn't mean they don't make mistakes or that they might do things you don't like, but they're generally doing things that have been market tested and they have excellent market insights. They also have a really strong ability to get media coverage for just about any book that they do if they choose to make the effort, which is key because they don't support all of the books that they publish. They also sell their books, as I mentioned earlier, in many different places. So let's say you're writing and publishing a book on cooking. They're not only going to get that book into bookstores, but they're going to look at specialty cooking stores like William and Sonoma, or other places where people who are buying cooking supplies might see your book and purchase it. Some of the drawbacks are that if you get into one of the really big New York houses, which I have listed here on the slide, like HarperCollins or Penguin Random House, these are really large corporations. So you are, entering what I would call a corporate machine. Part of them are owned, most of them are owned by media conglomerates that own lots of other properties. For instance, HarperCollins is owned by News Corp, which is the Murdoch company that also owns Fox. So, they're sprawling, generally profit comes first, and you're just one author in a sea of thousands of authors that they're responsible for. The contracts can be pretty restrictive. You're not gonna have a whole lot of flexibility to do other things with that book while you're under contract with the publisher. You're gonna lose some control. You're gonna lose the control in most cases to title the book, to pick the price or the format. You don't have control over the cover. Of course, the publisher is going to consult with you on these things, and they don't want to make you unhappy as the author, but they do get the final say. The other drawback for some people is that if you want to get into one of the really big houses, then it requires an agent in most cases. So that's, yet another hurdle that's put in front of you. Although the good news is that approaching an editor or approaching a publisher, it's more or less the same as approaching an agent, and we'll talk a little bit about how the sequence of events you should follow when you're putting your work on submission. So the big five New York publishers, they're really concerned with the commercial viability of your work. They're looking for books that make money. They do have some concerns that we might say are artistic or concerned with literary merit, but they're equally, if not more, concerned about the return on their investment. And so there are certain qualities that make a book a good investment. There's a particular length that most publishers are looking for. So for a narrative, that would be a novel or a memoir, we're talking about something that's in the 80,000 word ballpark. They're also really interested in commercial genres if you're a fiction writer. So these are the genres that are well established and have audiences that are hungry for new work in that category that they love. So romance, thriller, suspense, mystery, crime, women's fiction, historical fiction, young adult, science fiction, fantasy. These are genres with long traditions, active author bases, communities of interest surrounding them, and that makes these books easier to market and sell. That's not an exhaustive list, by the way, it's just some of the most popular. And then if you're writing nonfiction, authors are looking for a strong platform, and I'm going to define further what I mean by that in a moment. So, if that's what's positive, then on the flip side, the things that make your book more challenging, where it might not be seen as commercial, if your length is out of bounds for most commercial work. So, this is if your work gets too long or too short. Now, granted, there's a lot of variables, especially with nonfiction. There can be very short nonfiction and very long nonfiction. But for narratives, let's say for a novel or a memoir, usually publishers are looking for something that's between 50,000 and 120,000 words. It's also challenging to sell a memoir simply because there are so many people trying to get their memoir published. So certainly publishers are acquiring and publishing many memoirs over the course of a year, as many as they ever were, but it seems that today lots of people are throwing their hat in the ring and trying to get their life story published. So that just makes it harder. If you don't have a platform, it's going to make a commercial publisher less likely to take you on, and I still promise to tell you what that means. And then finally, if your work leans more literary, if you're writing, for instance, a collection of short stories, poetry, personal essay collections, or anthologies, these things aren't considered as commercial as things like a women's fiction novel. So you have to be aware of that when you enter into the traditional publishing arena, because you might need to look at publishers that are smaller, independent, and are not as commercially oriented. And we're going to talk about those. Before we get to that, though, I want to mention this thing called platform. So this is critical for most commercial nonfiction authors. If you're a novelist, you can multitask right now while I'm on this slide because I'm really just speaking to the nonfiction authors in the room. So when it comes to nonfiction, your visibility to a readership, your authority with that readership can matter as much as the idea. So you are the one bringing the audience and the market demand to the publisher rather than the publisher making you a big name. So when you pitch a nonfiction book to a big house and really an agent, because they're the ones who are going to get you in the door, you have to indicate your credibility, your authority, and your visibility in the market for this topic. So a platform can consist of many different things. It's not just your Twitter following. It often gets reduced to that, but that's just a piece of what platform is. It does include all of your online presence. So that's your website, blog, if you have one, a podcast, YouTube channel, your Clubhouse following, your email newsletter subscribers. If you are regularly featured in the media, if you have a column in a newspaper or magazine, that's part of your platform. Your entire publishing record, in fact, is part of your platform. Your professional network and your relationships, those are part of your platform because they help you spread the word about your work. And your influence with any sort of media outlet or organization, again, that helps you make your book visible, make yourself visible, and it potentially increases the sales of your book. So if I had to put a shorthand on what platform is, it's the ability to sell books because of who you are, because of who you know, because of how you're visible. Now, some of you may be wondering, well, what if I'm not commercial enough? Like, what if I don't have a platform and I'm writing nonfiction, or what if I'm writing a 300,000 word science fiction epic? What if I'm doing something that doesn't seem to fit these qualifiers? Well, there are many, many publishers in the United States and around the world that might be very happy to see and publish your work. And these are publishers that you can often approach without a literary agent. So this is a really broad category. We don't have time this evening to really delve into the nuances of every type of small independent publisher that's out there. But some of them are able to get books on the New York Times bestseller list. Others are quite small and maybe very limited in scope and maybe don't distribute outside their own state and online, of course. So you have to realize that when we talk about publishers outside of the big houses, they take they're all shapes and sizes. And some of them tend to be very focused in what they do. Some may be enthusiast publishers, meaning they only publish for a particular group of enthusiasts, like woodworkers or graphic designers or fine artists. They may specialize in illustrated books. They may specialize in publishing for a certain state or region. I used to work for an enthusiast publisher called F&W Media, which isn't in business anymore, sadly, but it was a collection of different imprints that focused on different interest groups. So these can be very big publishers, very strong publishers, but the advances might be modest. The distribution possibly could be more limited than what you would find with a New York house. On the flip side, because some of these publishers really know their audiences well, they really have well-defined readerships, they might be able to sell directly to those readerships in a way that's not quite possible for a big New York house. And then there are also academic and university presses that, even if you're not a professor or academic, they might publish work that is for a general audience, for a mainstream audience. You often find this with university presses that are publishing books of interest in their state or to their region or to the issues that affect their communities. Again, you find that there tend to be small advances here, and someone's probably asking right now, how big are advances? And when I say small advance, I'm saying basically four figures. So it might be a few $1,000s. That would be a small advance. Um, so that, you're not going to be quitting your job usually when you get a book deal with a small press or a university press. Although, truth be told, you shouldn't be quitting your job if you get a really big deal from a really big publisher. And I'm going to show you why in a little bit. There are some really, really small presses out there, and I call these POD-based presses, which stands for print on demand. It means that the books are only printed when they're ordered, which means those books aren't sitting in stores. And then there are also what we call digital only or digital first presses, and these terms are kind of describing a little bit of the same thing. But for the small print on demand based presses, they might put out the ebook, they might put out the POD edition, they won't do a print run, they might not pay in advance, and sometimes they're only run by a single person. Tweet Speak Poetry is an example of one that I admire and that does excellent work. But we're really talking about a small operation. And even though they can have some success with their titles, what they do is not comparable to what a big New York publisher does. And then you've got, interestingly, publishers of all sizes, big five New York houses as well as smaller houses. They often have efforts that I would call digital only or digital first, where they're doing that print on demand sort of model, where they won't do a print run, but they'll have a print on demand edition and they'll do an ebook. And it serves as, a way to find new talent or to capitalize on trends or to do things that maybe don't quite merit the investment in a full-scale print run and distribution. So an example of this would be Entangled. That's an offshoot of Macmillan, which is a big five New York publisher. And so if the book does really well, or if the author starts gaining in reputation, the publisher may commit to something bigger down the road. Now, I've kind of bypassed any discussion of the agents, but I do want to talk a little bit about what they do and why you would want one. Of course, the first reason you would want one is that if you want a big five publishing deal, you really need the agent to open up the door for you. But aside from that, they're really useful and often necessary because you need someone to look over your publishing contract. And agents are often the best people to do that. You could also hire a lawyer, but that comes with another set of issues that usually agents are just better equipped to know what's standard and what's not for the publishing company that you're working with. They often act as an intermediary between you and the publisher, especially when things don't go so well. So they can also play bad cop. They can ensure that things are happening in a way that's helpful for you, helpful for your book, that no one's dropping the ball. So they can raise a red flag if things aren't going the way they ought to be going. The really great agents are career partners and to some extent business managers. You know, they're helping you think ahead to what projects are next, how to strategize. Should you go to another publisher? What should your focus be next? And so the great ones are going to be with you for decades, assuming your career spans decades. They sign clients in the hopes that you're going to produce many books over many years. As far as finding agents, I'm going to talk about specific places you can go to research agents. But it may be hard when you're looking at all of these names and there are hundreds of agents out there to distinguish among them. How do you tell a good one from a not so good one? The good agents are going to have a track record of sales to publishers that fit your work. They only get paid when you get paid, and they make 15% of everything you get from the publisher. So 15% of your advance, 15% of your royalties if you earn royalties. And then they communicate about the feedback and the rejections they're getting from publishers. In fact, they owe you that information as part of their ethical obligation of representing you. Two of the biggest red flags is if they are charging you up front or they tell you lots of work needs to be done and, here, come work with this editor who is in my business and, once you pay them $2,000, come back to me and maybe I will represent you. That's a warning sign. And then if they don't seem to have a track record of making deals, that can be worrisome, unless, of course, they're a new agent and they're just getting started in the business. If that's the case, then what you would want to see is that they're with an established agency or that they have experience in publishing that would help them make those first deals. You do have to be patient. Agents, it could take them a year to sell your work, so you shouldn't assume that just because they can't sell it the first couple weeks they've got it, that they're a bad agent. Especially right now, response times are slower, so you have to give the agent time to do their job. So if you think traditional publishing is for you, then you'll need to start researching where to send your work. And if you often, many of the places that you would find literary agent listings, it's the same place you're going to find book publisher listings. Probably one of the best databases online, which you have to pay for, it's $5 a month, I believe, is Duotrope. So duotrope.com allows you to research both publishers and agents. If you're doing more literary work, like remember when I talked about the short stories and the poems and the essay collections, you might want to take a look at Poets and Writers website. They have a database there of publishers that's very literary oriented. And then you can also try Googling, but you have to be super careful and be very specific in that Google search, meaning you don't just type in publisher or agent, because that will bring up some scammy results. You need to type in, and I think this really only works for publishers, something like publishers of knitting books or publishers of Virginia history. And that way you're going to get the really specific results that you want. For agents, as I said, Duotrope is a great resource. Querytracker.net is very popular, both the free and the paid plan for looking for agents. And then publishersmarketplace.com is actually my preferred place to do agent research because you can do it by looking at the deals agents have made. It is a little bit expensive, though. It's $25 for a month. But you should be able to get all your research done in a month if you're batching all of this work into a limited time frame. The other thing you may want to take a look at is Manuscript Wishlist. So, this is a Twitter phenomenon where editors and agents talk about what they wish writers would send them. So, the sorts of stories that they believe that they could sell right now or that they just want to be able to read. And so, agents and editors tag this with the hashtag MSWL. And then the website MS Wishlist, which is unofficial, aggregates all those mentions in one place and allows you to search those mentions by category, genre, and keyword. So that can just put your finger on the pulse of what agents and editors are looking for. And if you're lucky, maybe you've written something that fits. So, as far as the money, I think it's important to understand what the money is like because there is often so little of it. So, here's how traditional publishing contracts work. You're granting the publisher the right to publish, but not copyright. Then, if you earn that out, you will get royalties. The smaller the publisher or the smaller the advance, usually the more flexible the contract should be, meaning they're not tying up your rights indefinitely, or you should be able to ask for more royalties if the advance is very low. So all of this is negotiable. That's what the agent's there for, is to help you negotiate this. If you happen to not have an agent, but you do have an offer from a publisher, then I would suggest signing up for the Authors Guild because they have a contract review service that's free to all members, and it's really invaluable. And you'll want to be a member of Authors Guild anyway. So here's an example, broad brushstrokes of author royalty payments. Again, this is really, really broad. You'll find all sorts of royalty rates out there. But you can see for the hardcover, if it's a $25 hardcover, you might get 10% off the retail. That'll be $2.50 you're earning per copy. For the paperback, the royalty rate is usually a little bit less. And so you'll earn less because the royalty rate is lower and also because the retail price is lower. And then for ebook, that works a little differently. You get paid off of net, not retail, and it's 25% of net. And then the publisher is normally getting 70% of the price set. So depending on the pricing of the ebook, you may be getting around $2 per ebook sold. Of course, if you have an agent, they're going to take 15% of anything that's on that bottom line. If you enter into a traditional book deal tomorrow, you would not see your book come out likely for another year, possibly 2 years, maybe even 3 years. It really depends on the publisher. I can say from my own experience of working with a university press, it took a full 3 years, but it wasn't a bad thing. I mean, that's what it required. So people are often surprised about how slow traditional publishing moves, but you need to be prepared that they're not going to rush for you in most cases. So as soon as you sign the contract, the editorial process will start. You're going to get directions or revision information from your editor. At some point in that revision process, while you're working with the editor, the marketing plan will get developed internally at the publisher. Then sales will meet with bookstore reps closer to the time the book comes out. The orders will come in prior to the release date. And then once the book releases, a lot of the publisher's work is actually done. And then they wait to see what happens. Does it sell? Does it sink or swim? So I just want you as an author to be aware that if you decide to think about the marketing and promotion on the day the book releases, it's really too late in the process. You want to be having those conversations with your editor and with your publisher at the time the marketing plan gets developed, which is while you're still working on the manuscript. So I promised to give you a kind of a suggested sequence here if you're going to pursue traditional publishing. If you think you might have a commercial work, then I would research and approach agents first. If that fails, start submitting to publishers that don't require an agent. And then that's when I would consider self-publishing or hybrid publishers. If you would like examples of submissions materials, which we don't have time to discuss tonight, you can go to my website, The Business of Being a Writer, which is at businessofwriting.org. If you click on the supplemental resources, you'll find examples of query letters, synopses, and book proposals, which are all documents you might need to prepare when you submit to an agent or to a publisher. All right, so let's switch gears and talk about the self-publishing path, which includes assisted and hybrid options. So the thing to remember with self-publishing, what rarely happens is bookstore placement, physical retail placement, mainstream media attention, or professional reviews. So professional reviews would come from the New York Times or Publishers Weekly or Library Journal, like the big places that it's their job to review books. Very hard to get this kind of coverage if you're self-publishing, although there are some caveats, which I'll cover. The business model is very different when you self-publish. So traditionally, published authors tend to earn most of their money from the advance, and they might not see any royalties unless the book is quite successful. And then they'll earn additional money from subright sales. So like if the book sells into a foreign market. Ebooks tend to be a smaller part of the pie. When you look at your royalty statement, it's usually not more than half of the royalty statement. For self-published authors, most of your earnings will come from ebooks. And if you're Amazon exclusive, you're going to be very dependent on Amazon for your income. So we're talking about, money coming from ebook sales from Amazon, and then also from their Kindle Unlimited program, which is where people borrow books and you get paid by the page that's read. And then independent authors also earn by bundling their works together, selling box sets, and we're really talking digital box sets here. Well, they'll put all the books in a series together and sell that in various retail outlets. So there are, just as I talked about, kind of different flavors of traditional publishing, where you've got the big five and then the smaller and independent players. With self-publishing, it also falls into a few different categories. So you've got assisted and full service firms where you are paying upfront, and virtually no one is turned away from these companies. Even if the work is poor quality, if you have the money to pay to publish, they're going to take your check. It's very easy typically to sever your agreement with these types of companies. If you're unhappy with their service, you can just pick up and walk away. And you can find these companies in all budget categories, and I'll talk about the budget categories in a moment. Hybrid is similar, but different. So they're not going to take every single person who comes in and pays money. There's going to be some sort of vetting process, some sort of quality control. They tend to pay a royalty like a publisher, although hybrids vary tremendously. So you may find some that are willing to pay or can pay 100% net, but it's less common. It's typically harder to sever the relationship with a hybrid. Normally, you're in with them for at least a year, if not longer. The plus side is that there's the potential for greater marketing and promotion support, which you'll likely have to pay for. They sometimes have the ability to get that mainstream media attention and sometimes even physical distribution, like into airport stores or into Barnes and Noble. So the capabilities vary by company. So you have to really closely research the hybrid company and see what they've been able to do in the past and use that to measure their potential for your book. And then finally, we've got the indie or DIY category where the author is entrepreneur. This offers a much greater chance of profit because you're going to keep your costs down and you're going to use those services I mentioned earlier, like Amazon KDP, Ingramspark, or other distributors like Draft to Digital. The cost range for these services, this is not the DIY piece, but this is assisted or hybrid. You're going to find the most basic companies are offering packages that don't even reach 10,000. You can probably find a company that might only charge you 3, 4, or 5,000, and they'll do a good job. Professional companies that do this will typically charge you up to $25,000, but usually you get up to that $25,000 mark because there's considerable marketing and promotion that you're paying for not just the book design and production. And then there are elite services that can really go right up into the six figures. And sometimes what makes them elite is just it's a very high touch process. You really feel like you're getting taken care of. There might be a print run involved. They may even bring in ghostwriters to help you get the book finished. So, it's very unusual that you would pay in the six figures, but you certainly can find those services out there. As you may have guessed from some of my earlier comments, I do think being an independent author and doing it yourself without the help of a service, it's the best chance at earning money from your publishing activity. Usually this works best if you're a genre novelist, so working in one of those commercial genres like romance, mystery thriller, science fiction, fantasy. If you're prolific, like you can churn out a few books a year, if you can reach your audience online, if you have an established business, these all are conducive to doing well as a self-published author. But I think it can be very challenging to self-publish if you're trying to do children's picture books, children's middle grade, children's chapter books of any kind, because librarians and teachers and parents, they tend to go to very specific places to find books. They go to gatekeepers. And so it's hard for self-published authors to sell ebooks to those gatekeepers through Amazon. The DIY model is so Amazon driven. You have to keep that in mind when you're thinking about whether this is a good fit for you. And then it can also be challenging for illustrated work. Illustrated work is more expensive to print. Print on demand isn't that great with 4-color if you're trying to do something like a coffee table book. And then if you're in the literary market, those markets generally look down on self-publishing, unfortunately, and so it can be harder to gain traction or gain respectability as a self-published author if you're doing literary novels. So the key attributes of indie publishing, if you're going to do it yourself and just hire the help you need, then you're going to be dealing with the retailers and distributors directly yourself, setting up accounts with them. That gives you the power and control to update your books and your pricing instantly. You keep 100% net of the proceeds after the retailer takes their cut. So the most popular services out there, which I've mentioned quickly already, are Amazon KDP, Ingramspark, and then also Draft to Digital. And each of them have a role to play. We don't have time to go into the kind of the little details about why you would combine certain companies in a certain way. But these are definitely the most popular and cover probably 95% of the places where you would want your book to appear, and would also allow for independent bookstores and libraries to order your book. Ingramspark is particularly important for that. If you want libraries and bookstores to get your book, you need to make it available through Ingram. It's the biggest book distributor in the country, and it provides an alternative for those who don't want to buy your book from Amazon. Okay, so I have gotten through all the material in about 40 minutes. I really look forward to answering your questions. Before I jump into the questions box and stop the screen share, I'll just mention that if you want more information on any of these topics, I cover them in depth in my book, The Business of Being a Writer. And I also have a free newsletter that you can sign up for at janefriedman.com. And a paid newsletter that's for professional authors, for those who are already published. I think it would only make sense for you. And you can find that at hotsheetpub.com. So I'm now going to close up the screen share and give myself a well-deserved drink of water.
Thank you for that presentation, and thanks. I see we've got some questions in here. Please continue to add those as we go. And I know we've had some questions about the recording. This, again, is being recorded and will be available immediately following the presentation. You can access it through the same link that you used to get here today. So let's turn to questions. Jane, I know you can see them too. So
Yes.
The first one we had come in was, what is the best way to evaluate a smaller independent press, and are there particular red flags?
This is one of the hardest questions to answer, because what's a red flag for one person is not a red flag for someone else. I do have a link at my site. Let me just pull it up because then I can put it in the chat. That goes into a lot of detail about this very issue. There it is, just grabbing the link. Of course, it didn't want to do it. Come on. Oh, got it. Okay, so I've dropped the link for those who are interested in doing the deep dive into this issue. Um, I'll say a couple things that for me, if I'm working with a writer, I ask them to really carefully consider like these two issues. One is, are they doing a print run? Because if they're not doing a print run, that to me indicates that they're going to be relying almost entirely on online sales. And is that okay with you? It doesn't mean that you can't have a book signing or that your book won't ever appear on a bookstore shelf, but it greatly diminishes the likelihood that you're going to see your book widely distributed in bricks and mortar. You'll be pushing people to Amazon or Bookshop or to whoever your preferred online retailer is. And the publisher may be focusing more on ebook sales. So that's another thing to consider. Um, you want to take a look at in the contract, what does the reversion of rights say? So every publishing contract has a reversion of rights clause. And it stipulates at what point you can ask for your rights back to publish the book either on your own or with another publisher. And the reason this is so important, especially with small presses, is because small presses are a little bit, well, they can be unstable, especially if they're only run by a couple people. If you might not ever know how financially stable they really are. And then one day your royalty statements stop arriving or the publisher appears to be going bankrupt. You need a contract that allows you the ability to get your rights back if something should happen to the publisher that concerns you. There are two types of contracts out there. One's a life of copyright, which sounds scary, but it's just a standard contract. The other is a term limited contract, so like a fixed term. If you're on a fixed term with a small press, that greatly benefits you. Because if it's for 3 years or 5 years or whatever, then you have some decision points, very firm decision points you can make and say, yes, I want to continue, or no, I want my rights back. With a life of copyright, which is much more common, there has to be some fine print in there that says under which conditions you can ask for your rights back. And it's usually a sales threshold. So for example, if the book doesn't sell at least 50 copies in a calendar year, you should be able to ask for your rights back. That's just an example. You'll need to decide what the right number is for you. So really look at that reversion clause so that if you are disappointed at what happens or the publisher is on shaky ground, you can go elsewhere.
Our next one is about illustrations in works. How do color illustrations impact the commercial viability of a project? Is there a sweet spot for number of images that are allowed?
So there are books where illustrations are everything, like you wouldn't have the book without the illustrations. And then there are those where it's more what I would call complementary and also discretionary. So that would be one of the first questions I have. Like for a children's picture book, everyone like obviously you can't take the illustrations out of that, and publishers know exactly what it's going to cost to print that book because they do it all the time. The same would be true of like a coffee table book or travel books where you want the color illustrations. Well, many cookbooks, you want the full color illustration of the finished recipe. What I find sometimes authors writing memoir or novels, they have this idea in their head of illustrations, full color illustrations they want to include, or memorabilia of some kind, or really elaborate maps, character sketches, and things of this nature. And that's really a conversation to have with your editor. They may or may not be friendly to having that included in the book. I would try not to make your agreement conditional on whether or not they accept your illustration plan, unless the illustrations are clearly critical to the book's success. So there isn't really a sweet spot here, but I will say that as soon as a book goes full color, it does dramatically increase the cost. So there has to be a really good market reason for a publisher to include those illustrations. Black and white, it's not such a big deal, although it depends on the sourcing of those illustrations. Like a publisher is not crazy about spending thousands of dollars on illustrations that won't sell more copies. So you may need to think through that critical question that I started with.
Thank you. If you've self-published a nonfiction book, what are the chances of selling it to a commercial or small press publisher?
It would depend almost entirely on what your sales success has been or the waves you've created by publishing the book. If you self-published it and, like, nobody showed up to your party, agents and publishers are not gonna wanna come to your party either. So, it's not impossible, but you would need to have a success story to share that makes the publisher excited and makes them realize how they could build on this success you have already experienced. The other thing you could consider is that, let's say you self-published your nonfiction book several years ago, and maybe it really needs to come out in a second edition because the market's changed or, there's been some development. And maybe you have some moderate success, and now you want to pitch a new edition to a publisher who will take it on. That has a better chance of success than just republishing exactly the same book.
Great. Next question, actually, this came up in our Zoom networking session previously also. Have you heard of Kindle Vella, and what do you think of this Amazon program?
I have heard of it, and I personally, well, I guess it's not a personal issue, it's more of a professional issue. I find it professionally pretty exciting because I've been waiting for Kindle to get into the serialized literature arena. For those who aren't aware, in Asia, online literature of the serialized type, like that you would read on your phone or through an app, is hugely popular. And a lot of the authors who are famous in Asia do so through something like a Kindle Vella experience. Um, so Amazon is a little bit late to that game, although the truth is serialized literature hasn't been that popular in the US, unless maybe you're reading like web novels or comics or something. So the biggest success so far has been Wattpad. And, you know, but Wattpad is a little bit different than what's been proposed with Kindle Vella. So Wattpad is a social network almost. You have your own profile and you can, you have followers and everything on it for the most part is free except for some premium stories. So you're entering a community with Wattpad. There's a lot of engagement that happens between writer and reader. On Vella, it's much more much more like I'm going to Vella to read, not to interact with an author. Or at least that's what we know so far. I mean, it hasn't even really been launched yet for readers. So it remains to be seen how it will develop. But essentially, you'll get the first 3 episodes for free as a reader, and then people will pay tokens in order to unlock episodes. And so this is going to really, this is going to be interesting to watch authors write cliffhangers at the end of each episode in order to get people to pay money to see what happens next. So I think it sounds like a smart idea on the part of Amazon, but it's definitely going to be appealing to a subset of authors, people who are really excited about writing in a serialized format and playing around in that sort of environment.
Awesome, thanks. If we're looking in traditional publishing, can you provide any tips for how to work with a marketing team at a traditional publisher to plan the launch of a book? Are they open to input from the author? And what type of support can they expect?
Yes, I have another companion blog post for this question, which I'll put into the chat.
Oh, so prepared, I love it.
So the post I'm sharing is questions to ask your publisher before you sign the contract. But honestly, these are questions to keep in mind at every step of the way, and especially on the marketing and promotion piece. So the first thing, well, yes, they do take input from the author. They want you to be engaged and involved. The type of support you can expect, I would go in expecting nothing and then be pleasantly surprised when you get something, because that way you won't be disappointed or crestfallen. Your dreams won't be trampled on. Expect that the entire job is your own, and then the publisher will be there to fill in the gaps and support you and ensure that your efforts are successful. Now, that's a slightly pessimistic view, but I think it's a realistic view that will position you best for success. So, to go back to the first part of that question, then, so working with your marketing team. Strangely enough, the first step to working well with your marketing team is working well with your editor. Your editor is your champion inside the publishing house. They're the ones who have daily contact often with the marketing and sales people. They're the ones who have to go knock on their door, or like just really get them enthusiastic about this great book that's coming out. So you need the editor in your corner, because it's partly their enthusiasm that's going to help your book succeed inside that company. So there has to be internal enthusiasm, and you're not going to be there every day like the editor is in those conversations and in those meetings. If you can, certainly you'll probably have an agent if you're working with a really big house. If you can, get some advice from your agent about their experience with this publisher, what they do or don't do, what you can expect, because they may have a lot of insight that will help you. I would put together your own marketing plan that is actionable by you if your publisher didn't help you. You can break it down into specific categories like online presence, like the online assets that you have and that you can use, any speaking or events or conferencing that you're going to do, and then the outreach to influencers, bloggers, podcasts, the places where you're hoping they'll feature your book or have an interview with you, etc. So do as much brainstorming on that as you can. Think about what you want to try to do on your own, and then present that to your editor, who will then present it to the marketing team. And you want to make sure that your ideas and the strength of your platform is included in that marketing plan. And then hopefully the conversation grows from there. I would not sit back and wait to be asked by anyone for your marketing plan, because they probably won't ask you. They'll just continue on their way. Publishers are terrible at communicating. So you are not bothering them when you email and ask questions. You need to be the one to kind of put your oar in. And if they're doing their job, let's hope they do, then they will set up some sort of a phone call meeting with you that will involve the marketing team and your editor to talk about the plan. So hopefully that call happens, and it will kick off the official kind of marketing piece of your work with the publisher. Another thing I'll mention quickly is that there's an author out there who writes both novels and nonfiction, Amy Stewart. She does really quick, effective book videos. I don't call them trailers because they're not like cinematic. They're just 1 to 2 minutes that help salespeople, marketing people at the publisher, as well as librarians and booksellers and book clubs understand what the book is about straight from her. It goes beyond what the marketing copy says. She's not just repeating what's on the back cover. She's giving people that more personal, intimate view of what the book is and how she thinks it's unique or why people are going to buy it. And that can be really energizing for the marketing and sales team. So I would definitely make a 1 to 2 minute video, put it on your YouTube channel. If you don't have a YouTube channel, start one, and make sure that your editor gets that link.
Awesome. I know we're getting closer to the end, so I want to let you sort of select some of these last questions, just so that we're able to get to as many as possible. So sure. I'll let you choose your next question.
Thanks, Nora. I see Janie asks, if you're writing a picture book, but you're not the artist, but you have a vision for the pictures, do you include that in your query, or just send the text? Just send the text. There will be time to share your vision. And if you put it in the query, then publishers might, or agents might, feel like you're going to be too controlling. So just leave that for a future conversation. Richard asks if there are any particular genres that are in big demand at the moment. I would say, generally speaking, everyone's looking for uplit, which is uplifting literature. And I think the reasons are pretty clear. In other words, we're not necessarily gravitating towards dystopias or things that are very dark. We want something that's uplifting and maybe escapist. I can say that crime fiction is doing really well broadly, especially in audio. I don't know what that really says about escapist and uplift, but there you go. And nonfiction categories for children are experiencing a lot of growth. That's both middle grade as well as YA nonfiction. And then graphic novels are experiencing a big boom for all ages. I see Chris is asking about the magic number. So, or the minimum number of social media followers or newsletter subscribers worth mentioning in a nonfiction book proposal. Well, it's not just the numbers, it's what you can do with them. So, if they're very engaged people, that matters. And so even if you have only 500 people on your email newsletter list, and maybe that sounds like a lot to some of you, but if you only have 500 or it's in the hundreds, you can say, well, that you have an 80% open rate, and then it's been growing by 20% every month. And so it shows growth. And you don't focus on the fact that the number is small. You can do the same. You can use the same strategy with social media. That even though you've only got 1,000 Twitter followers, you're engaging every day, and John Green, the YA author, follows you. So try to make the most of what you've got. It's hard to say that there's any minimum number because there is a more of a holistic look at all of the ways that you might be able to spread the word, including who you know and positions you've held. But if you want to be scared, I don't like to scare people, but if you want to have, you will really want to know the minimum number for a big 5 New York publishing deal, an agent who's considering you for a lifestyle type of book, like cooking, self-help, that sort of thing, they like to see an Instagram following of 20,000. So that's a lot. But I don't think that if you don't have 20,000, I don't think that means you don't get a book deal. It's just something that it gives you maybe just an idea of the competition, I suppose. Let's see, scrolling through. So Ivy says she has an agent who's been giving her feedback from publishers. That her historical thriller is enticing, but they need to see sales numbers before they sign me on. And this is a first book. That's pretty strange, Ivy. I mean, if you're a first-time novelist, it's your first book. I don't understand why they would need to see your sales numbers. So I don't know why they are telling you that. Yeah, that's a mystery to me. And then I see Stephen is asking, and is there any point in getting a website about the work or series before approaching an agent or publisher? Is this only effective for self-publishing? My attitude toward author websites is that it's never too early. And part of that is just the learning curve. It's not because I think it's going to help you and land an agent or publisher. I think it's that it helps you think of yourself as a professional. You start to think about how you want to communicate about what you write. And you have it there to be doing some of that platform work for you. It connects the dots among your social media accounts. If you go to conferences, you can put your website on your business card. It just starts to help in so many different ways. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It can just be a single landing page that has a brief statement about who you are and a nice photo. And then link to your social accounts if you have them. So I do encourage it just because it's easier to work on it in a little bit at a time rather than in one big push. So yes, give it a shot and see how it feels.
Excellent. We made it through. That
was
perfectly timed. Thank you, everybody, for all of these excellent questions. And Jane, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. This has really been wonderful. I learned tons, and I'm sure that our audience has been just soaking all of this in. So it's really, really been wonderful to have you here for our local author day. We encourage everyone to check out, again, our virtual author fair. You can find Jane there, and you can find information about how to purchase your book if you are interested in doing so. We have tomorrow also 2 more Zoom networking sessions that you can register for. And we have 2 more presentations. We have Margaret Montet presenting in the morning about including research, conversation, and anecdotes in your narratives. And then in the afternoon, we have Karen Hodges-Miller talking about authorpreneurship, the business of being an author. So we encourage you to please sign up for as many of those as you can visit our author fair. Jane, any final parting thoughts before we say farewell?
Wherever you're at in the process, have patience with yourself and patience to see results. It's a journey, a very long one.
I think that's excellent advice for all of us, writers, I know, especially these days. Thank you again. This has been wonderful. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Good luck.